Hello everyone, and welcome today. My name's Sarah Moffatt, and I'm going to be taking you through a presentation all about cutting through the noise of space for people manager. And thank you for joining. What I want to say is, obviously, I appreciate that this is, M365, and it's been running the whole of May, and I know that there are only maybe a few days left. So I really appreciate you coming on today. And just before I get started, I'm just going to run through a little bit of housekeeping. You can see my Twitter handle is on the bottom left-hand side of each slide. So feel free to tweet nice tweets about the session as I go forward. And there'll be an opportunity for questions at the end. I've left a good 5 minutes. Feel free to put stuff in the question box. And we can go through them at the end. What I'd also like to do is, thanks to our sponsors here, they're all their beautiful logos are on the slide in front of you, so I'm not going to read them all out, but I just want to say thank you to our sponsors today. And also we'd like to acknowledge, excuse me, the traditional custodians of the land on which this On People online conference is hosted, and the traditional custodians of the lands where our Australia-based speakers and participants are located. And we'd also like to pay our respects to elders past and present and future. So before I get into it, and also just to let everyone know, the QR code for the competition will be halfway through the presentation today. But just before I get into it, and you've probably guessed from my my accent that I'm not actually from Australia or New Zealand. I'm actually from London. And I just wanted to give you a bit of background about myself and my what I would say lovely accent. On the left hand side here, you can see that's me enjoying London 2012 Olympics. I actually was born in the centre of London. I'm not wearing my pearly king and queen suit now. I mean, there's no point. I'm not on camera, so why would I? And on the right hand side, this is me in Sydney, living my best life with one of the ultimate Sydney selfies there in front of the Opera House. And you can see a nice love heart in the middle of Australia there in the middle. So I actually moved over here last June to move here to be with my partner, and obviously I could spend lots of time talking about long distance relationships between London and Sydney, but that's not what you tuned in for today, so I'll move on from that. But I just wanted to give you a bit of background and a bit of colour to who I am and why I'm in Sydney. So getting back to it then, we've done the housekeeping, we've done a bit of an overview. So today it's all about cutting through the noise, a space for people managers. And really what I wanted to just start the session with is just a bit of an overview really. This session today is a bit different. I'm not necessarily talking about a technical solution, per se. I'm not saying this is what technical solution you should use. So hopefully that doesn't mean a lot of you will drop off the call. This is all about communications, and this is all about thinking about people leaders and that segment as a channel for communications and internal communications, and why they are so important, and blending in to that whole digital employee experience area. So it does touch on tech and it does touch on digital, but as I say, I'm not specifically saying about a technical solution. I'm going to give you an example of something that I worked on a couple of years ago and how I still believe it's relevant today. And that really brings me into who I am and my role and experience in terms of internal communications and digital employee experience. I've sat between the two areas. I think they're very important. They're very well linked. And that's who I am and my experience, and I've worked on intranets as well as digital channels and tools, as well as Yammer and things like that as well. So it's just to give you a bit of an overview for today's session. And this was obviously the promotional blurb, for want of a better word, all about the session today. And what we're talking about here is people managers, how pivotal they are in aligning engaging teams with business strategy. The example that I'm going to share with you is all about a dedicated communications channel and approach that can help them kickstart their month. And really, we're talking about how they can help with strategic direction and messaging for the organisation. So that's the backdrop for today, and I'm sure I will fulfil that brief entirely in my presentation. So what I wanted to do as well is just to give you a bit more understanding as to why I'm talking about people managers in relation to internal communications and this digital space is really building on the previous slide. It's, Engage for Success is an example of some research here on the right hand side, which was a piece of research done, I think it was 2009 actually, it's quite a while ago, but it talks about 4 levers to engage employees in the workplace. And yes, that's changed a bit over the years, but the foundations and the relevance of that is still very prevalent today. And the other 2, which I've not put on the screen, are employee invoice and integrity, which are also important. But what this shows here is the combination, of engaging managers and strategic narrative really engages employees. And what they can do, people managers, is they can make overarching messages relevant and local to teams. They can give context and rationale and background to key decisions and change initiatives. And you've got the open and candid dialogue with employees. So obviously employee voice was another lever that I mentioned for Engage for Success. But the segmentation is vital for good internal communications and strategic understanding. What does this mean to me? Why is the organisation doing this? And there's a little poster on there as well about great managers, and communications and connecting with people is all on there. So that's the backdrop as to why I'm honing in on this particular segment of people in the workplace today. And where you get into the I suppose like the seesaw here is what you can see from this slide is State of the Sector is an annual piece of research where internal communications professionals fill in a survey about internal comms, to put it simply. And what it is every year, and I'm apologising to any people managers on the call, but every year, and these are the words from the survey, people managers are denounced as detrimental. They've got poor line manager communication skills. They are a barrier to internal communications in the wider sense and strategic messages. But when you balance that with, well, okay, how much support is internal communication providing for line managers? How much of a priority are they? Well, you can see on the right hand side that actually they're not prioritizing them as a group of people, and how a one-off investment, whether it's coaching, training, or actually looking at your communications channels for people managers or support for them, how much change, positive change that can help in an employee and strategic communications environment. So that's just to give you a bit of a backdrop. And then if you overlay on top of that, this is just a few examples of what else a people manager needs to do. So from an internal comms perspective, and sort of my background is we want them to help with all these strategic messaging, but then they've got performance. We like to be we like to think we're driven by outcomes, but quite a lot of teams do have output type metrics as well. So, there's a lot of expectations put on people managers. So that's what I wanted to do, and just give you, thinking about the poor people manager now running around. And then, when you start to look at, what's out there now from a digital perspective, I mean, it's not necessarily, I'm not critiquing any other platforms, but what I'm looking at is the holistic picture of everything together. So if you think about learning and development, you've got the reporting aspects, you might have tactical guides, some of the things that I've mentioned here, the strategic conversations and the cascade piece. You might have briefing packs that you need the people managers to share with their teams, and you may well have, some organisations do have a monthly email communication that goes out. They might well have spaces on their intranets or areas, but what I'm looking at is if you put all those tiles together as a collection, maybe if you imagine even as a spoke of a wheel and the people manager being in the middle. From my experience and what I've seen, those things are are not, you know, they're not everything is available for the people manager. There's quite a hybrid of those things there, and there's a few gaps there. So I mean, this is really building up to I'll put the competition on the screen for you there now, halfway through, and this is really building up to giving you the, you know, some thoughts there about that particular segment and how you can use some of the tools from you know, this M365 that you've learned all about, and within your organization to really support that particular segment. And you know what I want to share here over the next few slides is just the example of what I mentioned right at the beginning. Is this is something that I worked on, which was called the People Managers Hub, and I worked on it a few years ago now. But you see, I mean, it says on the right hand side face to face, and I obviously appreciate we're in COVID times, but team meetings are also called out in internal comms research as being a really effective channel. So when you think about that and you think about all the other things, what we had was an idea, which is always the good ideas, or sometimes always seem to be someone else's, but an idea about, you know, a roundup of what people managers or line managers need to know and need to do, which at that point in time meant a go-to place on the intranet. And what we did is we supported that with a monthly email that went out. It was the second Tuesday of every month. Very simple email, not heavily designed. It can be read on, you know, different devices. I was going to say BlackBerry, but that takes me way back in time, iPhones or whatever. And it was directed to this single point on the intranet. And it also weaved in all of the other things that I've mentioned. So L&D, strategic news, you know, cascade packs, key dates. It was, you know, I hate saying one-stop shop, but that was what it was intended to do. And what we did is we validated it with a survey. We were doing an internal communications audit anyway, as you would do as part of good practice, you know, every 2 or 3 years. And, you know, we asked 87% of line managers, people managers in that organization said they liked the sound of it. We also gathered key themes from them, and we also ran a focus pilot. And what I want to share now is I'd like to apologize in advance for anyone that has very good user experience or CAD draw or whatever it might be, but this is my homemade screen grab of the People Manager Hub, and it was just really to give you a bit of an overview of the types of sections that we had. You can see there, in terms of the information architecture, there was a My Career and Benefits section, which was task-based structured content, which was based on, you know, the intranet review. But we had a People Manager Hub section in there, and within that there was the monthly update area, and we had key links for the People Manager. We had key campaign feature. We also had key dates as well for the month ahead. You know, and it was all driven as well by, you know, I'm sure many of you have done persona type work as well. You know, what does a people manager need? What do they want? As well as the survey that obviously supported that. And we had every month we had team talks, updates, and cascades. So we had maybe three, maximum of 4 pieces of content there. And you can see from the things on the screen, you know, are you setting the right tone was about the tone of voice changing in the organization. So that was, you know, a guide to help the people manager talk to their team about that. And it was a little exercise as well. We also have, as a channel in that organization, we had a chief executive briefing note that went out as a 3-4 minute video each month, and it had a much more detailed attachment. And that went out the week before. So that went out the first Tuesday of each month, which is why the People Manager Hub went out the second Tuesday of each month. And this is an opportunity for people managers to show this video within their team meeting. So really set the strategic context for the team against the organization. You know, key news, we just pulled out the top 5 news pieces each month of what you know, everyone in the organization should know. And then the bottom section is the section for the people manager. So that was driven, you know, you can see they're supporting you with mid-year reviews and do you need some assistance? That was all to do with employee assistance based programs to support the people manager. And what I did in my role as the channel manager and the IC lead in this scenario is I worked with a lead person from L&D, HR, employee engagement, strategic communications, and then I worked with the internal comms team. So there was a red thread running through each issue, and we collaborated together to create the content to make sure that it ticked the boxes for the people manager in terms of the operational sense, but also from a strategic sense. And the principle behind this, and actually some people did do it, is they would print this off, they would print it off, almost put it in the bring forward file, and actually use this as an agenda or part agenda for their big team meeting. We all have huddles and maybe online meetings, even more so now because of the current situation with COVID. But, a monthly team meeting is really important. And some managers would use, literally print this off and use this as a guide. So in terms of reviewing the channel, which as well is good practice, is we did a bit of a review. So we launched the People Manager Hub, and then this was a couple of years later we did a bit of a review, and I'll be completely honest, the results of this review was like last May, so I actually moved to Sydney in the June, so I did the review and came up with some recommendations, but I didn't put those recommendations to fruition myself. But anyway, these were the some of the things that came out. And when we asked people in the organisation where they got their information from and what they trusted the most, they said the intranet, My Manager, and team meetings. So they also liked and understood the purpose of the hub, but where we needed to improve on was this, being really specific with people managers about their communications role. So going back to one of my very initial slides, having real understanding so that people leaders knew what they were responsible for from an internal communications perspective. There was also a stream coming out of it where they wanted community forums. So if you think about some of the technology that's available, they wanted to have, peer-to-peer discussions that were closed. That's what they asked for. And it was a really well-known. I mean, what we had was, of the people managers in the organisation, we had a third that used it pretty much month on month. It had become part of their rhythm. They had their team meeting maybe on the Thursday or Friday of when the week that the People Manager Hub came out. They integrated it into what they were doing. And then we had a third of people that used it 50-50. And then we had a third of people that didn't use it so much. And that was driven by, they tend to be in the performance areas. So, I mean, I'm just being really honest with you and feeding back some of the areas where we learned from, in terms of, if you're thinking about doing something like this yourselves, where you can build on some of that feedback in your own organisations. But really what we were ultimately trying to do is help leaders at all levels communicate effectively with their people. And there needed to be also a deeper training connection in what we put together. So I think, that's an overview of the case study that I wanted to talk about. But as I say, it was the principles of what it was is that it was a single space for people managers to go to. And what we did say quite openly to people managers is if you go to nowhere else on our intranet, God forbid, on a monthly basis, you go to the People Manager Hub, and and if you are not able to read any other formal email, corporate email, which I'm sure they would, but this is what, in your role as people manager, this is the email that you need to read and the place that you need to go to on the intranet. And I suppose that's really, in terms of a wrap up today, we've got about 10 minutes left, but I'll just do a bit of a wrap up and then I can open up for any questions. But really, as I mentioned at the beginning, this was about a communications topic. We're talking about one important segment of users. I've given you the backdrop as to why I've, pulled out people managers as being an important segment or section of people. Very similar to, new starters are also a very important segment of users, both in terms of digital employee experience and internal communications. And it was just to give you a bit of a flavour of a case study, if you like, that I worked on, and something a bit different in terms of M365 and some of the other sessions that you may well have attended. So in terms of going back to it, I've just brought up the original brief, blurb for the session, which I've gone through today, and it was just really to. I'm going to come back now to the area, and I'm going to see if there's any questions. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to see if there's any questions, and see if anyone wants to ask me a question.
Thank you, and I will end the session now.